Welcome to the 18th Spencer Stuart CMO Summit, but obviously our first virtual summit. My name is Richard Sanderson. I'm a consultant with Spencer Stuart's Marketing Officers practice and delighted to host our summit today. The topic, appropriately, how do Chief Marketing Officers turn up in a time of crisis? Normally we would be on a stage in Midtown Manhattan, but necessity is the mother of invention, and here we are online. It does mean we can be broader, more global, and obviously more inclusive as well. Needless to say, this is a very unusual and a unique moment in time. The last few months have witnessed more change than we've probably seen in the last few years. Most obviously, many of us are not with our colleagues. Our routines have altered. The way we engage with people has also completely changed. And it coincides with the middle of a very incredible political and environmental moment as well. And so the debate for marketing leaders feels more urgent than ever. Initially, when we considered this, we thought of this as the beginning of a new decade and what would the 2020s usher in. However, it feels hard to look even beyond the end of this year, let alone 5 years out. The questions that we'll pick up today perhaps seem more relevant than ever. We'll be asking our panelists how have their agendas changed, what do their teams need from their own leadership, and how will marketing leadership evolve? To answer those questions, we're delighted to be joined by our first global panel. Erica Kerner is the Senior Vice President and Head of Marketing Strategy and Partnerships for One Championship, the leading sports media property in Asia. Erica is joining us from Singapore today. Sylvia Lagnado is the Sustainable Growth Officer for Natura & Co. Natura & Co. is a global beauty and personal care company. Sylvia is joining us from Brazil in Sao Paulo today. And Janie Whiteside is the Executive Vice President and Chief Customer Officer for Walmart. Walmart is the leading retailer and the world's largest company by revenue. Janie is joining us from the United States in New York today. So, my first question, what does the new normal look like for you? I realize a bit of a hackneyed phrase, but tell me a little bit about what do some of your routines look like for you now? Perhaps, Janie, I could start with you. What does your new normal look like?
So, I guess for us, nothing has changed and everything has changed, right? In that we have been open throughout this whole situation. We've been open for business throughout the pandemic, and obviously throughout all the the social unrest and what seems to be this sort of next iteration of what's happening. We sort of talk internally. I talk a lot about this sort of 5-5-5, right? Which is, I think we saw 5 years worth of acceleration of digital adoption within 5 weeks, and as a marketer, that either means that I've saved or I have to run to catch up, and over $5 billion worth of marketing spent, right? If you think about what we would have spent. And so we've had to figure out how to rapidly evolve our business model and the way that we communicate with customers. The one thing we do know, though, is that as I said before, we've had this rapid consumer adoption in terms of digital tools. So for us, store pickup and delivery sparked in March, and we saw over 300% year-over-year rise in that. We've had a 4-fold increase in number of customers trying to do pickup and delivery of their groceries. And interestingly enough, it's not just that people are doing more online. It's the breadth of people doing more online. So our highest growth rate in terms of digital adoption is with customers 50 years old or more, such that we've started to have to do digital how-to videos, how to order online, how to pick up groceries. And we're experiencing 4, 5, 6 million views on YouTube of a how to do an online shopping order video, which is incredible. So it's totally changed the way that we need to deploy our digital tools, but the way that we need to help customers engage with us in order to be able to facilitate the use of those.
Right, that's fascinating. So that sounds like a story of change within change, and how do you sort of innovate on the fly. Erica, out in Asia, in Singapore, what does the new normal look like for you? I realized perhaps your region of the world went through this earlier than other parts of the world. Maybe this is not the new normal for you anymore, but tell us a little bit around how your routines and customs have changed.
Well, I'm trying to figure out what was the old normal. I think that we did start going through this, I think, a bit earlier. And then we, in Singapore, lapsed into a second phase and went back into a second spike. But now we're coming out the other side, and hopefully we'll be able to maintain that. But I think for us, we're a sports media company. And we deal with the two fastest growing sports in the world, which is mixed martial arts and esports. And both of these are digital, very, very digital friendly sports. So what we found actually during this time is that our viewership is actually increasing. And more people are coming to us for more content more often. And so it's been a very interesting time, but at the same time, it's been a very fast-paced, pivoting every day, just as Janie was saying, in how we have had to adapt our strategies. And so it's been, I think, an interesting learning curve, but one that we're very excited about because, as I say, we've seen viewership grow in both of our sports, even though we're not hosting live events. So very interesting times.
Great, thank you. And Sylvia, what does the new normal look like for you and your business?
So we have 4 businesses. One of them we had just acquired, completed the acquisition, which was Avon, and then Natura, which is similar to Avon from a business model, but then Aesop and The Body Shop, which are predominantly retail, were predominantly normal retail. So like Janie said, similar here. Incredibly rapid adoption of e-commerce. For us, e-commerce was tiny, and now it's huge. And so, and I think that's here to stay. Obviously, it's already started to go down a little bit as our stores started to reopen. But even because they start to reopen east to west, and as they start to reopen, we see a completely new level of adoption of e-commerce sustaining. The other thing that we saw, which is very exciting, the positive side is, we have about 6.5 million consultants or representatives between Natura and Avon around the world. We've been trying to help them move online because if they sell with the help of social media, they get a lot more productivity. They can reach a lot more customers and sell more easily, but they were shy of learning. And we've got unbelievable amount of time on training and interesting adoption of digital tools. So we see direct selling moving to social selling very rapidly. For me, I started the job in February. I moved to Brazil in February. We completed the acquisition of Avon in January. My role is meant to be more medium to long term, and it's gone completely short term. I have one of the things I have beyond technology, sustainability, marketing. I have communications, internal and external. So I've learned a ton because to do internal and external communications, not having done it before in a time of crisis at a global level across 4 companies, it's been fascinating.
Right. You've all spoken about this concept of change and innovation and really to some extent acceleration of trends that were already underway. Once we do go back to normal, whatever normal looks like, do you believe that some of these consumer behaviors that you've described, will they go back to the way we were, or have we really entered a new phase of engaging, shopping, and talking to our customers and consumers? How much of this is permanent versus how much of it is temporary? Janie, perhaps I could ask you how much permanency you feel exists among some of these changes you've described.
I mean, that's the ultimate question, right? But I think I think there's a good degree of stickiness situated in this, particularly in the sort of the sort of habituation things. I mean, look, I think are people going to want to go out and explore luxury goods and touch them and have that sort of experience at some point in the future? Yeah, I think I think if I was at Chanel, it might be a very different answer than I'm going to give you from Walmart, right? But I think once you've experienced the fact that you can actually buy groceries and consumables and longer tail general merchandise items, on your schedule that turn up on the doorstep, when you need them. I don't know that I don't know that a lot of people go and wander around a supermarket for a series, for a discovery experience, right? Some do, and and I'm sure there will be journeys and use cases and all of the above that people want to get out. But I think a large part of this, our business, is sticky, and I think we are thinking a lot about the notion of convenience, and I think people have realized. They just want, I think there'll be a consolidation to fewer people, fewer retailers. There'll literally be fewer retailers around, right? When we come through this, I think people will consolidate. And how do you most conveniently offer as many things as possible that can turn up when you want them and how you want them? And I think that notion that actually you can do all of that and you don't have to go to all these places is going to stick. And I think there's lots of pros in that. And I think there are a lot of cons and responsibilities, particularly for the largest players out there, to think about how we capitalize on that, but we also allow other boats to rise, and we continue. So, for instance, for us, how we do that, but at the same time help spark the economy, spark small business, figure out ways that we can engage them within our ecosystem, and it's super important for us. And I think that's a responsibility that we've got as these behaviors stick.
I think it's such an interesting question, but it's such a big question because obviously there'll be differences around the world and there'll be differences in industry. Janie brought up Chanel, and I actually was out this afternoon in Singapore, and the line to get into Chanel was 20 people long. And every single luxury brand in the mall in Singapore was the same. And I know China, for example, as well, who've come out of lockdowns earlier than even we did. Same thing, luxury is bouncing back. So I think it is the million-dollar question because it's such a big question about geographies, but also types of retail.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Sylvie, you mentioned about the move towards, I think you described it as social selling, as opposed to purely just digital commerce. What does that mean here? And again, is that a long-term sticky trend, or is that something we'll move away from?
I think what we've seen is both. Well, I think it's going to stick to for those who adopted it because it makes them make more money more easily. And to Janie's point, if it's more convenient, it's better for you, and you can do other things with your life, or you can do more of something that you enjoy. So I think, I don't expect adoption of social selling tools to go down. And I think it's very exciting that we've got so many people to learn how to do it. It's so much easier, so much better for them. But I do think that shopping is fun. We are seeing, people go back to the ESOP stores, very, very much so. There's a little bit of binge shopping, but it's also, if it's fun and if it's a pleasure to go out and be there, why not? So Janie and Erica talk about the trend towards online. So I think that is going to stick. I think that businesses have realized that travel is less needed and that offices are less needed. So I do think that there'll be a different approach to how we work and investments in real estate and travel, in particular business travel. I hope that the attention to inequality is going to stick. I think there's a completely new level of consciousness, and I hope we don't lose that. And I guess last thing I was going to say, we are very involved with things like domestic violence. Two of our businesses, Avon and Natura, have been for a long time, and now it's a group effort, and it's shocking how much it has increased. So I think that depression has increased, domestic violence has increased, and at the same time, people's focus on their personal well-being has increased. I think those are obviously huge issues, but good that awareness has gone up, and I'm hoping it doesn't go away when life goes back to normal.
Well, you brought up an interesting topic about some of the more profound changes that we've been witnessing over the last few months that have become more intense, but it also puts a burden on us as leaders in terms of how we show up, how we lead, how we respond to our teams. I'm just curious for the three of you, how have you adapted your own leadership and communication and engagement style in this environment, I'd be certainly interested in any observations around how you choose to lead, how you have led, and how that's different over the last 3 or 4 months compared to the style that you've probably built up over years and decades. Janie, I'd love to get a sense of how are you leading right now? How are you engaging and how are you communicating with your teams?
It's a great question. Look, I think there's an interesting dynamic that is very Walmart specific in that, Walmart grew up out of Bentonville, Arkansas, as everybody knows, right? It had this very tight culture that was based on always being together all the time in home office or out in the stores, right? You went forward and back, and as the company grew and we brought in more domain expertise and located people on the, in the Valley and on New York, you always had this, this issue in that, being in New York, although I was in Bentonville a lot, the rest of the time you were always the annoying person on Zoom, right? Asking somebody to move their head, right? Or butting in, or it's been a great equalizer. For us, it's been a great equalizer because it doesn't matter now if it's Doug McMillan, me, Mark Laurie, Suresh Kumar, we're all on Zoom. So that's been actually, to some degree, I think, a great learning experience for us culturally, particularly, across all levels. The second is we've actually found we're way more efficient because everybody was together all the time. Everybody's in meetings all the time. And my team would tell you, this notion of you have the meeting and then there's the post meeting that would happen on the walk back from the conference room to the desk has gone away. So there's lots of positives, and we've certainly seen our capacity to focus and innovate much more quickly because you can just get everybody on a call. I think, having said, we had all these big meetings. I mean, I think communication is key. Super clear, you have to communicate, and you have to be able to make sure that we're creating connections. And so, that involves, for me, that's, a weekly video message to the team, right? We do a weekly, we were doing a weekly, touch base, there are multiple thousands of people in the teams, but we kind of get them all on and, open Q&A with me and my leadership team, much more so than we'd ever done.
Right. Erica, I'm curious, how are you communicating? How are you leading? What are people learning about you that they wouldn't have done if you were in the office?
Well, I think we've all been on this COVID coaster together, is the way I look at it. But I think for me, we're the opposite of Janie's organization. We're a startup. We're only 8.5 years old with about 200 people in the organization. So, for us, it's very different in how we're communicating. And so for me, I think the biggest change is I have to be much more purposeful with my communication. I can't just bump into someone on my team or a colleague in the hallway. I can't go out for lunch or coffee with someone to make sure they're doing okay and that their mental well-being is okay during this time. Some people will reach out to you and say they're struggling or ask for help, but others won't. And so I find that the biggest change for me is really taking time out of every day to check in with someone on the team, whether they report to me or they're a colleague, just to make sure they're doing okay, because we're all in this together and there are people who are really struggling, and it's hard to know that when you're just on a call. So I think that's the biggest change for me, is that thinking about it rather than it just happening naturally because I see my colleague and I can see that they need help or they're struggling.
And for you, Sylvia, I realize you joined Natura earlier this year, so many people I would imagine didn't know your leadership style before coming in, and you probably had to introduce yourselves to many people virtually. How have you done that? Tell us about your onboarding experience and how you've done that in a virtual way.
Yeah, thank you. I've done I had a month of traveling, still a little bit, meeting people online. I had been on the board of Natura & Co. for 5 years, been in the transition from Natura to the acquisitions of Shop, now Avon, and becoming Natura & Co. So I knew a lot of people. I think that all my onboarding has been online and very special and very nice. It works beautifully, and it's been phenomenal how much more quickly. I'm able to do it because I can talk to people in different countries without having to travel, and everybody got used to doing it this way. I think the top leadership team got much closer. What we hear is how much more effective we are as a group, how much better we know each other. We've now started meeting every 2 weeks, but until last week, we're meeting every Monday for an hour and a half, which is a lot more than we would have done if we weren't going through this crisis. And we liked it, and we continue to do it, and we found that was a lot more effective than long, 2-day meetings. So we stopped those. So I think I would say the only thing is, because I'm loving this approach, but a lot of people aren't. So last week we had a very large meeting, and we asked people to say how they're feeling, 3 words on the screen, and we had one of those word maps forming, and we had almost 1,000 people. And there's a lot of I'm exhausted, and I'm lonely, and I'm tired. So there are lots of I'm proud. And I think people are very proud, especially, we launched our sustainability vision 2 weeks ago in the middle of all this. And I think people felt, wow, the fact that we have the time, we reserve the time to do something that's such long-term nature. But I do think it varies a lot depending on personal circumstances. And it's not always obvious to me who is needing what kind of help. So I think we are becoming much more aware and asking more and changing our approach depending on who we're talking to. So there are some people happy to never go back to the office, there are people dying to get back to the office.
Right. Erica, you actually have I think a somewhat unique perspective on COVID-19 due to the fact, I think you were living in Asia when SARS hit 18 years ago. You've already lived through a quarantine as a result of that. How different, similar does that feel? Any lessons or learnings or experiences you can share from that, particularly as a leader and manager of teams and people?
I definitely think that living through SARS helped me be prepared for this pandemic. I mean, again, they were on very different scales. But the way that I was living in China at the time, in Shanghai, and we were on lockdown, we were in quarantine, it was very, very similar to how things are operating right now. But it gave me the confidence to understand how people were going to react to this. But what I think is most interesting is it was 18 years ago. Social media obviously didn't exist. So the way that the world has communicated during this is very, very different than it was during SARS. In SARS, it was very much, it felt like a China problem, whereas this is really a world problem.
Right. Good. We've obviously witnessed some incredible societal change over the last few months and a renewed focus on diversity, inclusion. Janie, this is really a question for you at this point. I'd love to get a sense of how is Walmart thinking about this? Obviously, as the world's largest company by revenue, you are very present. How are you taking steps to address diversity and inclusion?
So, it's on our minds a lot, and I think there are multiple layers to this, right? One is obviously our corporate commitment, and we've committed $100 million over the next number of years against a series of broad-based initiatives that we've announced, which transcend pure philanthropic work, but really get into how are we digging into communities and how can we make relevant systemic change. So there's that wave going across, which is great. But to me, it's about some of the actions that you take day to day. And so we, just as leaders, have been having a lot of, we call them courageous conversations. I don't really know that that's the right word, but many of the conversations have been quite uncomfortable. I will tell you that, as we listen and we learn and people talk about their experiences and, the series of small things that they have experienced, either working within the company or in life. And we think about, how we learn and grow and get better by understanding as colleagues, as leaders, as a retailer, how can we evolve and get better? So those have been going on. There's a series of company commitments about how we make sure that we have the right voices at the table and the right processes and structures and practices to be able to hire and recruit and retain and engage and grow diverse talent across the customer org, where I think, I say often, if my team is not representative of the customer, then how can we build product, service, and tell stories that are rightly representative? And so we actually, across lots of dimensions, are way more diverse, made up of a way more diverse group of voices. But we're making sure that those are appropriately heard. And you heard me talk earlier about making sure that we have the right direct relationships with a series of agencies. And, one of the things that I heard as I've been going through these leadership sessions, which is interesting, is we have a series of diverse owned agencies. Typically, they work on segment-based creative. Why would you restrict those agencies to only working on segments? And why wouldn't you allow them to pitch, much more broadly and see what that looks like and feels like? So we're working through how we do that. We're working through how we create. The task I've given the team is go and find the most progressive, creative, exciting, provocative, diverse voices, and figure out how we get them to input and push the Walmart business forward.
Sylvia, tell me a little bit around how some of these changes have reinforced your diversity inclusion efforts.
The fact that we were discussing the commitment to life during this time led to more reflection and tightening, or being a bit more aggressive with the drafts that were there, before we got Avon on board and before all this happened. So we call the 3 pillars on our commitment to life, and we call the relevant one to this conversation: we respect human rights and be humankind. But the things that were there are the ones you'd expect. So, absolutely no tolerance to human rights issues. Chain. So there's a very bold commitment on traceability in that respect. But women, a majority of the 6 million consultants and reps are women. They work mostly part-time with Natura and Avon. Both companies had a lot of commitment to improving women empowerment and education, health, and obviously ability to earn and be independent. And I think it's just to strengthen our commitment to the right model for direct selling. We never went pyramid or extreme multi-level, but I think a stronger consciousness about tracking income and tracking how much they're making and making sure that they're making more and more every year, and the education health is also improving. And also a lot of work for communities in the Amazon with the same focus. I think women in management, Natura & Co is extremely almost there already on 50-50, but there's a little gap on payment, on earning. So I think both on that and on making sure, absolutely sure that everybody in the company is at or above living wage, we decided to go there faster. So we made a commitment on women, gender equity, and on living wage to just get there within 2 years. 2 of our companies are B corporations, and B Corp has a metric on diversity, which is to be on the highest score. You have to get 30% of your management to be of underrepresented groups, and we decided to go for that. It's a very bold target. We said we're going to get there in no more than 10 years, but it's just the beginning. We had a lot of discussions in the last month about it. We decided to go for the high end, the most ambitious, and we are nowhere near. Now the interesting discussion starts, which are like everything that's legally doable yep. in terms of recruitment that we can do to get there as fast as possible. But we're very excited to kind of hold hands and go for the highest that we think is a very bold target.
Great. Thank you. Janie, Erica, Sylvia, thank you for joining our first global panel. We found the one hour of a day that I think overlaps for all of us. So thank you so much for adapting your calendars.